The wind cuts through the marshes of Flanders like a knife, carrying the scent of salt, mud, and freezing death. It is the winter of 1346. Outside the walls of Calais, a tragedy is unfolding that will stain the soul of chivalry forever. In the icy ditch between the city walls and the English camp, 500 human beings are huddling together, their skin turning black from the frost. These are the useless mouths, the old, the sick, the children, cast out by their own governor to save food, yet barred from the English lines by a king who has turned his heart to stone. They scream for bread, but the only answer is the whistling wind and the impassive stare of English archers. By sunrise, the screaming stops, leaving 500 frozen monuments to the brutality of the siege. Months earlier, the air was filled with the roar of victory, not the silence of the grave. King Edward III of England stands on the heights of Crecy, looking down at the ruin of the French knighthood. His archers have slaughtered the flower of nobility in a single afternoon. But Edward knows that a victory on the battlefield is smoke in the wind, without a foothold on the land. He turns his gaze north to the shimmering coastline and the defiant walls of Calais. It is the gateway to France, a pirate's nest that has tormented English ships for years. But as he marches his army to the gates, the reality settles in. The double circuit of walls and water-filled dikes turns the city into an island. He cannot storm this fortress. His engines will sink in the marsh. So Edward makes a decision that chills the blood of the defenders more than any assault. He orders his men to put down their swords and pick up their hammers. The English do not just camp. They build a new world. Rising from the swampy ground comes a city of timber and thatch, a mirror image of the fortress they intend to destroy. They call it Villeneuve-la-Hardy, the bold new town. It is a marvel of logistical power, complete with market halls, butcher shops, and cloth merchants laid out with the precision of London itself. Queen Philippa arrives with her ladies, bringing music and courtly splendor to the edge of the mud. They hold tournaments and feasts within sight of the starving walls, turning the siege into a surreal festival of patience. Inside Calais, the governor, Jean de Vienne, watches the smoke rise from this new English city. He knows the message it sends. The English are not leaving. But Calais has a lifeline that Edward cannot easily cut: the sea. By night, the dark waves of the Channel hide a daring game of cat and mouse played by the ghosts of the coast. From the port of Abbeville, a privateer named Jean Maron runs the blockade. Operating out of a tavern known as the Tin Jar, Marant uses small, shallow-draft boats to skim over sandbanks where heavy English warships cannot follow. He slips through the fog to deliver flour and hope to the starving garrison. For a moment, it seems the grit of the French sailors might outlast the patience of the English king. But kings do not like to be mocked by pirates. As winter thaws into the spring of 1347, Edward tightens the noose. He builds a massive fortification on the Risbon, a sandspit commanding the harbour entrance. Then he sinks ships laden with stones in the narrow channels, sealing the harbour mouth and cutting the throat of the city. Maran can no longer get through. To break the morale of the city, Edward unleashes a new terror: bombards. These primitive cannons spit fire and stone balls with a thunderous roar. They cannot breach the thick walls, but the smell of sulphur and the deafening cracks shatter the nerves of the civilians. It is a psychological drumbeat of impending doom that echoes through the hollow streets day and night. Inside the walls, the inventory of the edible begins to shrink. First, they eat the grain and the salted meat. Then, the horses, the pride of the knights, are slaughtered, their flesh sold for weight in gold. When the horses are gone, the citizens turn to the dogs and the cats, hunting them through the alleys until the streets are empty of life. Finally, they are left with nothing but the rats that scurry in the cellars. Men gnaw on the leather of their own boots and saddles, boiling hides to trick their bellies. The city is rotting from the inside out. Despair turns to madness as the summer heat rises, baking the stench of death into the stones of the city. Jean de Vienne, the iron-willed commander, pens a final plea to his king Philip VI. "We have eaten our horses, dogs, and rats," he writes, his hand trembling, "and nothing remains for us but to eat one another." The letter is intercepted by the English. Edward reads it, smiles, and attaches his own seal to it before sending it on, a cruel taunt that the end is near, and then a shimmer of hope. The banners of France appear on the ridges of Sangatte. King Philip has arrived with a relief army of 20,000 men. The skeletons inside Calais weep with joy, lighting fires on the towers and hanging banners from the battlements. They signal to their savior that they are still alive, that their agony is not in vain. But the savior is powerless. Edward has turned the geography of Flanders into a weapon, digging trenches and flooding the marshes until the English camp is an island fortress. Philip VI looks at the impassable terrain and the English fleet dominating the coast. On the night of August 1st, the defenders of Calais watch in disbelief as the campfires of the French army are extinguished one by one. The sound of marching feet fades into the distance. They have been abandoned. Jean de Vienne climbs to the highest tower and lowers the royal standard of France. He orders the torches to be lit, not a signal of hope this time, but a signal of surrender. The gates, shut for 11 months against the might of England, finally creak open. Edward's terms are not those of a generous victor. He demands that 6 of the city's principal burghers march out to him. They must come barefoot, bareheaded, dressed only in their shirts, with heavy ropes tied around their necks. They are to be the sacrificial lambs, carrying the keys to the city and the castle, offering their lives for the others. In the market square, the richest man, Eustache de Saint-Pierre, steps forward first. 5 others join him. It is a procession of ghosts that walks toward the English camp, gaunt, starving men in rags. They kneel before Edward in the dirt. The English barons, hardened warriors who have seen 1,000 deaths, are moved to tears. But Edward calls for the executioner. He wants heads. The axe is raised. Then, Queen Philippa, heavily pregnant, falls to her knees before her husband. With tears streaming down her face, she implores him, "Gentle sir, I humbly pray, for the sake of the Son of the Holy Mary, and for your love of me, that you will have mercy." The king looks at her, then at the skeletal men. "Ah, lady," he sighs, "I cannot refuse you." The men are spared, but the city is not. The French population is expelled, replaced by English settlers, turning Calais into an English fortress for 200 years. Today, Rodin's bronze statues of the burghers stand in the square, weary, terrified, yet immortal. The Siege of Calais was won by starvation, but it is remembered for sacrifice. For more history from the front lines, please like and subscribe.